Well, thanks for being here, everybody. Making it to the end of the day. How many cups of coffee have you guys had? Not enough. That's a really good answer. Yeah, I've had like 3 or 4, but it's good. I also like to move around on stage. I'm half Italian, so my wife says I actually can't do this if I don't move my hands around. So it's part of that. My name is Elia Locardi. I am a full-time travel and landscape photographer, and they say that a journey of 1,000,000 miles begins with a single step. But let's be honest these days, we don't really walk anywhere, right? It begins with a single flight. But when they say a journey of 1,000,000 miles begins, and I'm saying with a single flight, what they don't tell you, it also ends with a lot of jet lag. Like a lot of jet lag after 1,000,000 miles. So for the past 10 years, I've been traveling full time. So since 2009, visited more than 65 countries, flown nearly 2,000,000 miles. I'm about to cross 1,000,000 with Delta, which is, kind of cool. I'm gonna have that glass of champagne and then immediately schedule an MRI. Because I think it's probably not healthy to be flying that much. And I've been trying to get all over the world. I work in different regions all over the world, but you'll probably notice that there's a lot of blank spots on that list and on that map. Because for me, the quality of travel is more important than quantity. I think when we first get started doing this kind of stuff, we think, you know what, I have this bucket list, and I have these places that I have to go. But what happens is you start going to those places, you visit Italy, and you're like, I've seen Rome, I've seen Venice, I've seen Florence, but oh man, there's like 50 other places I need to go. So what I try to do is I try to return to locations, because every time I go to a place, I fall in love a little bit more, and I want to photograph different areas, meet different local people that can take me to places that I hadn't seen before. So I don't think I'll ever span the entire globe because I tend to focus on the places that I love the most. But it's interesting though, traveling full time is really fun, and it got to be quite a bit of back and forth. So in 2012, my wife and I decided to do something really interesting at the time, and that was to sell nearly everything that we owned and become 100% location independent. Now, location independent wasn't really a term back then, but it's certainly a better way to tell your mom you're going to be homeless. I thought about this a lot. I was like, Mom, we're going to consolidate all of our possessions down to the absolute bare necessities, and we're going to get on the road. We're going to be location independent for a while. And she's like, it sounds like you figured all that out. We didn't. We had no idea what we were going to do, but at least we didn't say the homeless word. And that actually gave us the ability to travel longer. So if you think about giving up your home address, cutting everything down, all the possessions, you can basically get everything down to just the necessities. And in the left corner there, in the upper left where you see those bags, you guys might see bags, shoulder bag, roller bag, camera bag. I see kitchen, living room, dirty laundry, which is the biggest challenge of being on the road full time. And it's interesting too because when we travel, we want to collect things, right? We go somewhere, we see something really beautiful, we want to keep in our office or in our home. When everything has to fit into those bags, what can we take with us? I get a new jacket, I have to get rid of one because everything has to weigh that 23 kilos or the 50 pounds on those flights. So we started collecting boarding passes, train tickets, bag tags, and all of those things. And the whole time that we stayed location independent, I created this collection. So that top image is actually a few years in, the collection just starting. And it's gotten massive ever since. Now, when you travel, though, this is really important because people always tell me this no matter where I'm going. I'm hiking in the Himalayas, I'm in the desert in the Middle East, and people are like, you know what? Number 1 rule, stay hydrated. That's a lie. Stay caffeinated. See that coffee maker up there in the upper right corner? That is the most important thing I travel with, except for my wife. Sorry, Naomi. It's coffee sometimes first and then you. It's really important because, you know what, we have to, by plane, by train, by car, sometimes on horseback down there, muleback, we have to get ourselves all over the world, and caffeine is our friend. And, down in the lower right corner, do you remember when we used to have to fill these things out? Now, I used to love those things because I'd be gone for sometimes a year or two, and I'd run out of space, and I'd have to write 30 countries, and then I'd get to the Customs and Border Protection, the agent would look at it, and he'd be like, wow, welcome back. They didn't even know. So, I kind of missed that. It was really fun. And now, when you're traveling and running a business, because we're running photography businesses too, the world is that office, whether it's an Airbnb apartment, a tiny little, cell that you can get in Tokyo, a little pod hotel. And I want to tell you guys that it's an organized process, right? Like offices look like this. It's beautiful, it's clean, it's seamless. But the reality of the situation is that usually it's like this. It's like, gotta catch that flight tomorrow, and everything's just crazy, and like, we're moving fast. But what's at the center of everything right there is that coffee maker. Yeah, arguably there's a glass of wine too, right? But this is like 11 a.m. in France, so that's okay, and it's fine. As long as you finish the coffee first, it's okay. So it's interesting because when you set your office up, it doesn't matter how many times you set it up. Every time you leave a location, whether it's 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, you have to pack it all up and move again. So we're constantly moving, constantly moving. And it's been interesting because I've been able to have these great experiences because not having to go home, not having a home base, enables us to do something that we call travel longer, stay longer, extend stays, be out there in the world, build business, build connection, and just explore the ideas of photography. And very slowly, over time, that led into bigger speaking events, bigger clients, different venues, and unfortunately and fortunately, it also led into a ton more gear than those few bags that I showed you before. It's wild. It's like, oh, these new cameras are coming out. We want to try this and test these lenses. Oh, but we're doing a video project, and now we need drones and all these other things. So that few bags, being location independent, turned into a logistical nightmare. There was a point where I had a storage unit in Central Florida. We were using a storage unit in Bangkok. I had my uncle's place in Rome and a friend's place in Tokyo. And between all those things, I was like, can I ship this stuff to you, pick this up here, drop it off there? And it became so crazy. And what broke location independence for us from a technical standpoint was drone photography. And we started doing drone workshops. So I'll ask you this question. How do you travel with 6 drones? You don't. You don't. You simply don't. It's impossible, actually. Because some countries are drone friendly and some aren't. And that's like when you have like a little Mavic or a Mavic Air. It's awesome these days because it's like, well, it's kind of cute and small and fits in the bag. But yeah, that tends to get you flagged. And when you're going to 20, 30 countries a year, this is not sustainable. So we decided 5 years into location independence that it was time to get an office again and a home. And when I say office and home, I really mean a place to put all of our camera bags and stuff. But I have to say, like, we moved our location to Florida. We got all of our stuff in one place. And after being on the road for 5 years, all this gear, all these different places, this was an amazing feeling, right? The feeling of going home. But more importantly, the feeling of finally having all of this valuable stuff in a safe place. Yeah. Yeah, it was a few months later. Now, I was born and raised in the Florida Keys. So most of you in the audience call these hurricanes. We call this Tuesday afternoon. It's like a normal thing. And weather plays a really important role in my photography, but yeah, this is just one of those things. It was actually kind of funny. We're like, really? Everything and now this? But it's interesting because my photography started out on the basis of wanting to find these beautiful and unique places in the world and then frame them in a unique way. Try to find a new way and a new light. And what I really started focusing on and what I'm going to talk about first is what I tend to do with all these locations is really focus on these moments in time. And that's choosing the right moments in time, the appropriate moment in time for each scene. And if we take a look at these locations, let's find a beautiful location. I know that Santorini's not that beautiful, but it'll have to do. It's not that good. But let's watch the light because the light changes. Get there in the late afternoon. Watch the light change. Starts to get softer, light gets softer, and then once the sunset happens, hopefully we get color, but then after that, something really beautiful happens. That's when the city itself lights up. Lights come on in the city, and we have this really nice blue hour, or this harmony between natural light from the sky and artificial light from the buildings. And in reverse, well, actually, before that, that was maybe 4 hours of time, and I know you'd never want to spend 4 hours in Santorini. I mean, that was just horrible, right? 4 hours of time to decide on one single image for the portfolio. So I chose the blue hour because I thought it represented sort of that best mix of light. So what I'll do is I'll study places and I'll find locations. Like this is shot from Victoria Peak in Hong Kong the day after a typhoon. And typhoons and hurricanes follow me all over the world. It's just natural. And this is the opposite, a very early morning. So this is the morning blue hour. Lights are still on in the city. And as that crazy turbulent storm keeps moving through the city, the lights turn off. And there's a period where things become a little bit gray, a little bit flat, but then it turns into that morning. So we're looking for that sun to rise. But what if one moment in time isn't enough? What if it can't be represented just with a blue hour, or just with a sunrise or a sunset? What if we want to use different moments in time together? So sometimes what I'll do is I'll experiment with blending different parts of the day. So this image, and I'll explain it later, is going to be part of the sunrise and part of the blue hour. So again, a marriage of artificial and natural light, encompassing about 30 minutes in time. And it's really interesting, but in order to do that, first we have to understand the different times of day. And the best times of day for landscape photography are definitely going to fall under these categories. And the first are the golden hours. Golden hours are really interesting. In New York, it's amazing when that sun gets really low because we start to see all these highlights on the buildings, these long, soft shadows and everything too. But here, the Seljalandsfoss in southern Iceland, which is now a really famous photography destination, you can see that the sun has not gone below the cloud line, which means it's still casting light. A few minutes later, when that sun disappears behind the clouds, there's no light in the foreground. So the golden hour is all about balancing that, the last rays of sun, the last rays of light on a scene. And in this case, they illuminate the back wall of the waterfall itself, and it causes some really nice dynamic lighting in the scene. And this works all over the world. A little bit further from that location in Iceland, this is the last light on Vesterhorn Mountain. And so a few minutes later, everything's in shadow. So just waiting for that last light. Now, it doesn't always have to be the last light. Sometimes it's the first light, arguably a little bit harder to wake up for, but you know, the first light. This is Valensole in southern France. It is the best-smelling photography destination in the world. It's amazing, actually. So this is the first 90 seconds of light. 90 seconds of light. 2 minutes later, and the light was too harsh. So we're looking for that first light on the rows of lavender and that nice light in the sky. Now, the golden hour, we call it the golden hour, the magic hour, but it can be a golden 30 seconds. It can be a golden all day in the summer near the Arctic Pole. It can be crazy. Or sometimes it's just the full illumination of a scene. So this is really stretching into a few hours in the morning, and I have different versions of this photo I'm going to show. The Chiredo Pagoda, that's Fuji Yoshida, the town, and Mount Fuji in the background. About 2 hours into the morning before all of the light hit the cherry blossoms and the pagoda itself and the mountain. So it really extends into the idea of the last light or full light onto a scene before it gets too high in the sky, before the sun gets too high. But to be honest, the most beautiful time for photography, landscape and cityscape is definitely sunrise and sunset. Now, it's a little complicated, but do you know what the biggest difference between sunrise and sunset is? Sunsets happen at a reasonable time of day. Yeah, no, it's true, it's true. There are other differences, yeah. You know, obviously like sun positioning and things like that. It's typically less windy in the morning, less people in the morning. That's another big one. But for the most part, we have to get up pretty early for sunrise. And you know, let's be honest, sunsets are easier. West Coast, all day. I'm from the East Coast. It's like, really, again? 5 a.m. again? But what's cool about this is we have the ability to capture the light of the sky and the light and color of a cityscape or a landscape. You know, this is when everything sort of, you know, comes together for us. We really love it. Nobody's mad at a beautiful sunset. Raise your hand if you've ever said, I hate sunset. Nobody. Sunrise, maybe, but not sunset. It's just a way that we can capture scenes in a beautiful way. We can utilize all the color, the sky, the elements, turbulence, all of these things. Works really good in Italy because they do all the work for you by building all these amazing little villages clinging to the rock. You know, then we're just waiting there over and over and over again until we get the right sky with the right composition and the conditions. But it's fun. And sunrise and sunset, this is a really interesting place. This is, it's a little different now. This was years ago. South Island in New Zealand, Dunedin is the town. This is the beach called St. Clair Beach. And there are just these pylons. Now, what I thought was really interesting years ago is there's these pylons, which most people, like locals, they're like, what are you photographing, mate? And it's just a bunch of sticks, you know? But photographers were like, pylons and a beach, it's amazing. But what's wild is there's an island out there, dead center, there's this little island. And I was like, this is fascinating, like symmetrically into an island for photography, that's cool. But I kept thinking, like, what did they build this for? This is in the middle of the nowhere. It doesn't connect to any land portion of this. It's just on the beach. I feel like the Kiwis were like, that looks like a nice island. Let's build out to it. And then they just stopped. They gave, this is never going to happen. But it's a really fun photo spot. It was a sunrise, and luckily it was the first try. It doesn't happen very often, the first try, when you get the nice light. And it's fun these days, too, because all over the world, I mean, we have the capability of capturing scenes in a different way because the camera technology has made us so spoiled. Let's be honest. We're so spoiled now, even with our iPhone. The new cameras, we're getting 4 extra stops in the shadows and dynamic range, 6 extra stops of recovery, which basically means historically 8 years ago, 10 years ago, when we had to use that bad word called HDR that everybody hates now, to combine all these exposures together, it was because we didn't have this dynamic range. Now with most of our cameras, we can just shoot and recover shadows, have all the highlights and everything. We have so much power. It's so much fun to actually shoot directly into the sun. But my favorite time of day to shoot is during the blue hour. Now on there I have written twilight and blue hours, but I have to let you know that there's a big difference between twilight and blue hour. Blue hour is a time of day, twilight's a vampire movie. So I usually don't run around saying I love twilight because I can, blue hour, we just, have to make sure we think about these things. Now this is cool because the blue hour happens 2 times a day, obviously before sunrise, which is even less reasonable, and then after sunset. And it's not to be confused with full dark or just night, because it's that time when there's still enough ambient light in the sky that light ambient light in the sky is able to illuminate parts of the background. So the rocks, the trees, all of these fill in elements. And then what happens during the blue hour, as the light decreases in the sky, the light in the foreground in the city starts to come on, and you find this balance, this perfect balance of artificial light being visible, natural light fading. And then you find the perfect balance of the blue hour. And that's fun all over the world. Kyoto in Japan, it's an amazing location there. Same thing, it's really fun because we're able to create this strong emotion of night without having to rely on night photography. Because if I shot this in full darkness, it's only lit by that single light source on the right. So at that point, the pagoda would be blacked out on one side. I wouldn't be able to see any of those little details. So again, I say blue hour, but it can be a blue 5 minutes. In Dubai, we call it the blue flash. It just happens, you have to make sure you had it and just keep shooting continuously. Or it can be a long time. But it's really finding that harmony. The other thing that's really nice about it is we're working with color tonality of warm over cool tones. So we can work with that yellow lighting that we have in different parts of the world and take advantage of putting it over a cool background. And it can be really fun. So Hallstatt in Austria, again, this has become a really, really famous photo spot, and it's beautiful. And when I was there, I actually did a little bit of research. Did you know that 600 years ago, when they built this town, they specifically built it for photographers? Yeah, it's a fact. No, look it up. You can put it on Wikipedia right now. It's there. It's just weird. Like if you haven't visited there yet, or you have visited, well, either way, when you actually start, you're like, oh man, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find this photo. Oh, there it is. It's like you literally go around the corner, but it's amazing. So what I wanted to do was highlight the architecture because the Austrian architecture is really beautiful. They use a lot of colors, a lot of warm tones, a lot of eggshells and different things, a lot of different wood. So I wanted to capture that. With the blue hour, I'm able to represent those colors, represent the lights, but then also still have that soft ambience of the light from the sky. But what's interesting too, and I'll have a before and after comparison of this, you still have the detail in the mountains because it's not fully dark yet. So the blue hour gives a lot of opportunity to be able to capture really interesting things that you wouldn't see otherwise. Laser show in Singapore is actually a really impressive laser show. It's really fun. And I had this idea that I wanted to sort of freeze it in motion, find a way to capture all of these elements. And I wanted to do it during the blue hour. So the first trip to Singapore, I actually spent a few days there at Marina Bay experimenting with this until I was able to get it right. But it's fun. It's a really fun process. In Dubai, it looks like a future city. It's like being on a Blade Runner sequel. And what's fun is Dubai, most of us are now familiar with these shots of fog, buildings, spires sticking out of fog. And I've spent the last, 7, 8 years now visiting Dubai trying to capture the fog. And this was my first experience with the fog. And what's happened here is I'm on the 42nd floor, which is like the sub-basement in Dubai, like 42 is nothing. and I'm in the fog. I didn't get high enough above to be, to get that effect. So it kind of swirls around, creates this really cool ambience. So with that light, what's interesting about this too, with the blue hour, is we have light reflecting from the sky and the side of the buildings, light reflecting from the road and the bottom of the buildings, just reflections and glass everywhere. So this is when you can really see all of that light just mixing around in an image, and it's really fun. Well, my favorite shot that I've ever taken during blue hour is this. This is Tiger's Nest in Bhutan in the Himalayas, one of my favorite countries, my favorite places in the world. And what was interesting, the first time I visited Bhutan, I wasn't there for photography. I was shooting video as part of a team to capture this event that they call the Tour of the Dragon. It's the longest one-day mountain bike race in the world. These guys are crazy. They race over 3 of the highest peaks over the course of 24 hours. They don't even close the roads. It's during the rain season. Last day, we were able to hike up there and see Tiger's Nest, but it was the middle of the afternoon. And it was really pretty, but I was like, I want to capture the blue hour. So I asked my friend who was guiding for us, I'm like, Yanten, do they light this up at night? He's like, I have no idea. I'm like, Yanten, you were born here, right? He's like, yeah, I've lived here my whole life. Okay. How many times have you taken people here? Thousands of times. I'm like, okay, so we can't stay here? He's like, no, you can stay as long as you want. And I'm like, okay, but they don't light it up at night. He's like, I have no idea. Why? He's like, because nobody's ever asked me to stay up here this long. All right, so we're staying. I'm set. And the director of the project, the video project, is a good friend of mine, Tim Gorski. He's an animal rights activist, amazing filmmaker and director. And he took the long way, and he came like an hour later. And he comes up, and everybody knows Shaggy from Scooby-Doo? That's Tim Gorski. He's like, oh, hey, this is so beautiful. Like, oh, what's going on? I'm like, hey, Tim, we're going to stay for sunset. And he's like, I can stay my whole life up here. That's fine. But we're going to need some beer. And I'm like, Tim, but we just hiked for 3 hours in the Himalayas. Like, there's no way there's going to be a beer place in the middle of nowhere. And Yanten raises his hand, and he says, I know a place. And he just takes off. And I'm like, we lost Yanten. Like, he's never coming back. So we decided to stay. And what was interesting about this is just before the sunset, the monks were coming up. They were walking up, right? And they're carrying the buckets of paint and the bamboo, and they have it, and they're taking it up. They're doing restoration. And I'm like, okay, everybody in Bhutan's really nice. Everybody speaks English. So I walk up to them, and I'm like, hey, guys. I don't know how to address the monks. Like, I say, like, hey, monks. And I was like, hey, guys. They're like, yes. I'm like, so do you light this up at night? And they looked at me, and they're like, yes, we live here. And I was like, okay, fair enough. It's like, we have electricity. I was like, okay, good. Yep, great. So I felt good about it. Shot everything. Blue hour happened. Turned to night. We had to start hiking down. Headlamps turn on. And as we're leaving, Yanten comes back. And I'm like, what did you do? And he's like, oh, I brought beer. And I'm like, where is the beer? So if you're familiar with them, their national dress is called the Go. It looks kind of like a kimono, but it wraps like this. And they call it the largest pocket in the world. Like, you just start like pulling things out of this pocket. And he starts pulling out these giant beers and handing them to us. And I'm like thinking like, wow, I don't know how you did that. And he's like, so yeah, so I just hiked all the way down, drove to town, drove back, and hiked all the way back up. I'm just like, you are superhuman, but now we have to hike down in the dark drinking beer, which was really weird. It was really weird. But what was great about this, was really funny, is I didn't do anything special, really. I just stayed up there and drank beer on the way down, which is kind of like a victory at the end. But working with the government and the tourism department, when we brought this to them, they said, we have never seen a photo like that before. We have never seen Tiger's Nest so beautiful. And I said, what do you mean? They're like, nobody's ever photographed it at night before. I'm like, that's impossible. It's impossible. We Googled it. There was not a single photo of night. So they wanted to use it, and then everybody liked it. The royal family really loved it. Everybody loved it. And it made me think, I didn't do anything. I didn't put myself that far outside of my comfort zone. I just stayed a little bit longer. And I think that's with photography now these days, too, where like sometimes we're like, I wish I would have stayed a little longer. I wish I would have stayed an extra day. I wish I would have stayed the whole weekend. That time when you're sitting on the plane and the sunrise is so amazing. Those times, like, I wish I would have stayed. So now I'm constantly saying, I'm going to spend more time. I'm going to study more of the elements. I'm going to try to find things that are more unique. And the weather plays such a huge role in my decisions as a photographer. This is one of the first shots I took for my portfolio. It's shot in the middle of the day, which, if you follow the presentation so far, I talk about just the golden hours. But this was one of the first trips I took to Greece, central Greece, Meteora. And I was really depressed because we had such bad weather throughout the trip. And then one afternoon, after 4 days of fog, the fog lifted, and I went to the top and started taking photos of this fog swirling around. And since it had been so wet for 4 days, it also popped all the fall colors. It was very lucky. And it taught me that, there are these amazing weather events all over the world where we can start to create something that's a little bit different. So if we can find the beautiful location, recognize the time of day, and then rely on Mother Nature to be able to give us these elements, like the fog in Tuscany, the Val d'Orcia. And this is now the most photographed farmhouse in all of Italy. It's really funny. One of the little places you can stay nearby charges a photography fee now. It's really cute. So we knew the fog happens in the spring. So one spring, this is quite a few years ago, my wife and I stayed. And again, staying in Tuscany, for 7 or 8 days is amazing. And every morning I'd wake up very early and I'd go out and I'd see if there was fog. And I'd do that. It was pitch black every morning. I'd just go out and I'd set the tripod up, put the camera on it, turn the ISO all the way up, not trying to get a quality photo, just trying to see in the dark. And I'm like, okay, there's some fog, and I chase the fog. Some mornings there was no fog, and then eventually 7 mornings later, I was able to get the fog exactly where I wanted it. And can you guess what I did on the 8th morning? Nothing. It's really hard to stay in Italy and get up every morning because they eat so late, and they're always like, free wine, free wine. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna die the next morning. But that's, 7 mornings to get one thing. So, and I like this. I'm really trying to study certain elements, right? We talk about sunrise and sunset, not pertaining towards weather events. In Venice, I've been to Venice many times, and shooting from Ponte Accademia 2 times a year, you can actually line the globe of the sun up dead center of the canal. So if you're shooting in Venice, usually you can line the sun up. Amsterdam's really cool for this too because the canals are angled, so all throughout the year you can start lining the sun up with this. So I think I spent 3 or 4 years visiting once a year, one weekend, and I'm in Italy a lot, trying to get this. And every time it was too cloudy or it was too hazy or just nothing ever worked out. And one of the last times I was there, I just decided to stay, you know what, forget sunrise, I'm just gonna go there for sunset, and there was a thunderstorm coming in. So I just started, snapping consecutive 30-second exposures over and over and over again, and I was able to catch a little lightning strike. And I'm like, I kind of like it. It's got a mood to it, and I posted it to Flickr, and then from Flickr, it ended up on Reddit. You guys know Reddit? Okay, yeah, never argue on Reddit, right? It's like that's like the pure internet. So it was on Reddit and went really viral, and the whole narrative on Reddit was really funny because they were saying, it must be nice to be able to Photoshop whatever you want in, like lightning. And I was like, I usually don't argue. It's like being on Reddit sometimes is like playing Call of Duty with 12-year-olds. Like you shouldn't do it. But I was like, this makes me mad. I was like, come on, look, if I'm gonna composite lightning in, I'm gonna composite lightning in, like not that tiny lightning. Nobody's gonna composite tiny lightning in there. But this isn't composited either. This was really interesting. In Florence, this is a fun location because it's beautiful to see Florence. But a lot of these locations in the world, we're stuck, sometimes in an area as big as this stage. Like this is as much as we can actually move around. We can shoot wide, we can shoot telephoto, we can shoot panoramic, black and white. We can change some things, compositions, but what are we really waiting for? It's the weather. And in that area, it's the sunset. We want to have the most beautiful sunset because that's what's going to set the image apart. So what I'm looking for now are strange or unique weather events. So if you think about being able to frame this composition, could we all go there and frame it? Yes. Could I frame it again? Yes. But is there going to be this crazy electrical storm behind it the next time? And this is really funny because I grew up in the Florida Keys. We're the monsoon state. I don't care what people say. I don't know about that sunshine thing. And growing up, my mom would always say, you don't ever play in a thunderstorm, in a lightning storm. And I'll tell you what, I never listened to her then. And now as a photographer, there's no way. There's no way. Sorry, Mom. No, this is just amazing. So we're looking for these events to be able to capture something unique because when they happen, they only happen sometimes once, or even if they happen again, they don't happen in the same way. I said I spent so many years in Dubai. I'm in Dubai at least once or twice a year, and I've spent years and years, 5 or 6 years, trying to capture the fog. And every time, it was so funny because I'd go for 2 weeks, and fog season can happen October through March, sometimes randomly too. It can happen 10 times a year or not at all. And it usually happens in the morning. So I'd get there, and this was so frustrating for me because I'd go there and I'd arrive on a Tuesday, and they're like, oh man, you missed the fog over the weekend. It was the best fog we've had. I'm like, well, I'm here for 2 weeks in fog season. They're like, yeah, it'll happen. And then again, I'd leave on Wednesday, and as soon as I land on Thursday, they're like, oh, you just left in the fog. It was like, we've never had fog for 5 days in a row. And I was like, okay, maybe next year, maybe next year, maybe next year, every single time. It just became comical. My friends in Dubai were like, you know what, just leave because the fog will come, you know? And then after a project in Bhutan, staying in the east and farm stays for about 2 or 3 weeks, we decided like Dubai was the landing point to go back to the United States. And it was kind of mid-March. It's not really normal for fog to come mid-March. So I booked this hotel because I knew the view and I knew the person who was running the social media. She's a friend of mine. And I'm like, you know, at least we'll be comfortable. And if fog happens for some reason, we'll be there, but it's not going to happen. The next day, it happened. So what I learned was sometimes you just have to not try. But you have to be ready. So I knew this location. I knew the panoramic image would work. I'd already practiced a bunch of times from the Shangri-La Hotel. So when it did happen, I was able to capture it. But it's interesting too. And it makes it fun because sometimes we see images and we're like, wow, you know, that's great. You know, it's a great image. But we don't think about 5 years or 6 years, or try, fail. We don't think about that. But that's really what goes into work today, and it's something that I really try to do. And it's interesting, too, because that leads into the idea of blending, moments in time, and I'll explain it in just a minute, but what you're seeing here in Rome, an amazing place to shoot, we're seeing the lights from the blue hour and the sunset. So sunset happens before. 15, 20 minutes later, what we're actually seeing is that light coming on from the buildings. So blending those moments in time, and it's interesting because we can do this all over the world, and it's something that I started to really focus on because I thought about the way that we perceive memories. Let's say we go to Ia in Santorini, and we take a photo, we go back to our friends or the office, and you show it, and you're like, it was so much better than that. You know, you had to be there. You didn't see how the light was reflecting off of this, how it transformed as it moved up the sky. You didn't hear the people playing music. You didn't smell all the food. You didn't basically have all of the senses because as photographers, we can't use the 5 senses the same way we can if somebody's actually there. But what we can do is we can translate these things into color, and texture, and shapes. So I started to think if we remember something not as a single image, but as a range of time or an actual event, is there a way to encapsulate this into a single image that better represents the entire memory response of being there? So I started to experiment first with taking the peak of the sunset and blending it with the colors and the lights. Now it's interesting too because this is about 15 minutes of time apart. But in some parts of the world, especially when you go very far north, Stockholm, Sweden is a great example. The sun's still setting for like an hour and a half, and the city lights are on just because the sunset lasts so long, 10:30, 10:45 p.m. But in most parts of the world, like that sunset just falls. It's done. You don't have time to wait for the lights. So can it happen naturally? Yes, it can. But will it happen naturally all over the place? No. And that's when we have to experiment. So here, this is Osaka Castle. This is called the Floating Castle on top of the cherry blossoms. And what you're seeing is a sky at sunset, sun setting behind me, but I love the way the clouds looked. And then 15 minutes later, they lit up the cherry blossoms. But also 15 minutes later, the sky was completely blue, so I was able to blend it. Again, in Greece, too, finding that harmony between a beautiful sky, the beautiful point of the sunset, with the perfect part of the light. The lights came on. And then getting all of those colors to work together in a seamless way. It also works here in New York. Well, in Brooklyn, looking at New York. Some of the best views of New York are like outside of New York, which is really fun. But this is the same thing. So it's a 30-second exposure with the sunset and the light hitting the pylons. And I'll have a before and after sort of a composite build to show of this too. But again, just that idea of putting all this light together. And it brings me to this image, which is the same location that I showed in the beginning, the Chieda Pagoda, Mount Fuji in the background. But this took 3 years for me to be able to capture the way that I wanted it because I needed the cherry blossoms, and cherry blossoms don't last that long. Sometimes it rains for 4 or 5 days and they all get decimated, so you have this small window of opportunity to capture it. But what I like about this image particularly is that light comes from all directions. So Mount Fuji is illuminated on the right side, the pagoda on the left side, the cherry blossoms from underneath, the town of Fujiyoshida from within. And it creates this harmony of swirling light and balance of color and texture. So it's really fun. So Light being important and playing with light. And when we can understand light and we can control all of these elements, then we can start to have fun. And that's where we have an area like Petra, Jordan, Petra by night, when they light all these candles. And it's an amazing experience. But staying there a little bit longer, capturing the candles, and then waiting for the stars. So allowing the stars to spin across the sky. Now, I said weather was really important in my photography. And when I first got started, there was nothing more depressing with landscape photography than a blue sky. I was like, oh man, there's no clouds for a while. So I decided to get into astrophotography instead. So in this way, even if I have an empty sky, I can still sort of fill it with stars. Now, this is what it looks like when you have a lot of ambient light, right? There's a lot of light in the city, so we're not seeing a full set of stars in the sky. And it's not just stars that we're trying to capture now. With cameras today, we can capture the northern light. We can capture all of these things that we couldn't capture before. And when we have a perfectly dark sky, we can see the Milky Way, and we can even see almost every star streaking across the sky. Now, I love to do star trails, and I'm self-taught, 100% self-taught in photography. But I really got into star trail photography because I wanted to capture this area of Mount Bromo in Indonesia. So I taught myself how to do this just so I could be there when these elements all line up. Now this is fog, but it's actually high cloud line because this is a high caldera. So the fog actually pools into this area. And then I was able to capture it with a soft moonlight from the left, and then all of the stars rotating around the sky. Now this is the closest thing I'll ever come to photographing an alien world. It just looks bizarre. And I'll share my dream with you, is to actually photograph Earth from space. I live on the space coast of Florida. I've been tweeting Elon Musk every day. Not a single reply. Yet. I don't think it's going to happen. I actually did apply to be an astronaut. This is a funny story. With the new wave of astronauts and NASA revamping space travel, they opened it up to the public. So I did send in my resume. No reply on that one. Apparently, Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale wasn't good enough. Wasn't good enough for them, but maybe someday. But that leads me to this. That's the gear, right? What we take with us has to be rugged. It has to be as tough as we are. If we're going to hike with this, if we're going to beat it up, put it on airlines, all this kind of stuff, it has to be rugged. And I want to tell you that landscape photography is always like this. It's just, perfect and clean and nice, and there's no wind, but it's not. It's like this. You're scraping ice off the back of the camera. You can't feel your fingers. It's -10. Or worse, it's like this. Oh, sorry. It's like this. Sand. So first time I visited Dubai, I'm like, man, a sandstorm would be awesome. It's not. It's really, really not. Like, it's the worst thing. And while I'm going to spend a week digging the sand out of my ears, off my hair, and my clothes, I don't want to do that with the camera. So durability is really important, but so is image quality and dynamic range. And that actually leads me to post-processing. Does anybody know Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? What's printed on the front of the book in big block letters? Don't panic. Don't panic. Post-processing, everything that I've shown is broken down in these few steps. It's raw file adjustment is the first thing, adjusting the roll in Adobe Lightroom, Capture One, whichever you use. Exposure blending, that could be credible dynamic range, like highlights and shadows, or it could be time. Then color and contrast adjustments, color separation, getting all those colors to work together. Last thing, sharpening, detail, noise reduction. Now, if you are just posting things to Instagram, don't worry about the sharpening and detail, noise reduction thing. At 1080 by 1080 pixels, like, we're never going to notice how sharp that image is. But if we're talking about fine art gallery printing, which I'm doing some of now, these things, then yeah, we take that extra step to make sure it's done selectively. And let's look at this image. We saw this very early, right? This is straight out of camera, Seljalandsfoss, southern Iceland. It has potential. Could use a little bit of work. The sky's blown out. I don't know, on the lower left side, next to the ridge, you see that little vehicle? That's a tour bus. So you have to get rid of the tour bus. That's very important because nothing says remote destination like a tour bus. So we have to clean up the color, the light, and get rid of the tour bus. Tour bus must go. Always get rid of the tour bus. Huh? I don't have much time to go back, but yeah, I can. So see, any distracting elements go away. And what we do is we clean up the highlights, which means that we recover the highlights. We pull the shadows up means we recover the shadows and we balance the light. So that's very important. It becomes more evident with this shot too, because this is straight out of camera for Hallstatt. Same thing, we have some color adjustment. Those mountains are really blue. We have a blue color cast. Everything looks a little bit flat on the right, and we have a lot of blue color cast on the buildings. And then you see that white thing in the middle of the water? That's a duck. So you have to kill the duck. Just kill him. Done. He's gone. And all we've done really is clean a few things up. So we have the reflections on the right become a little bit more pronounced. The colors and textures all kind of speak for themselves. This is that same shot of the bridge, the Kiwi Bridge to Nowhere, we'll call it. Now, this is after a weekend, so there's a Heineken bottle back there. See the beer bottle? That's got to go. I'd love to say that was somebody else's footprint on the lower left, but that was mine. It's a very early in the morning. So what I need to do is fix the highlights on the left. They're too blown out. But then also the pylons themselves, watch what happens when I adjust the shadows. Yeah, there was a lot of hidden stuff in there. It's all there. So just with simple raw adjustments, we can make changes. But what about time? So this is the Road to Mount Cook, also in New Zealand. The title of this image is The Road to Mount Cook. I was not feeling creative that day when I named it. So I had this idea, stand on the side of the road, not in the road, and I want to capture light trails, which is additional 30-second exposures of car trails moving back and forth. But at this time of the day, there were no cars. So it's like, I actually had to have my friends drive back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So I had to cheat a little bit, and they were open to it. So basically, similar to star trails, you can layer light using blending modes inside of Photoshop. It's really fun. So we're able to create something that's a little bit different and play with the composition. Well, this build is interesting because this is straight out of camera raw file, Osaka Castle. This is the moment that I picked as the base plate. And this is what I call the base plate, is the first one. Usually it's going to be the sunset. So this was the sky I wanted to work with, and this was the castle that I wanted to work with, obviously, because it's the castle I'm shooting. 15 minutes later, the lights came on. And then, so that's step one, right? Raw file adjustment. Step two, exposure blending. And then step three was contrast adjustment. So the third step is that we bring it all together and we bring all the contrast up. And it's actually kind of cool if you think about it this way, because when you actually marry two images together, it's not really a composite because it's the same image over top. It's just a different moment in time. But when we add the third element of contrast adjustment over it, it helps marry it together and give it that contrast and color separation. Same thing here. This is slightly underexposed, but this is pretty much straight out of camera. That point in Santorini when I felt the sky had potential. But then I had to wait a little bit longer for the lights to come on to blend everything together. So you can see, and this happens all the time, right? We have a beautiful sky. In a landscape environment, it's like a beautiful sunset, it's backlit, but what happens to our foreground? It just all gets washed out, right? It's just black or dark. But what did it look like when there was actually light in the scene? It had a lot more dynamic element to it. So what I can do is I can leave the tripod in the same place, and I'll take photos over the course of maybe just 20 minutes or 2 hours, and then I'll find the right moments in time. So the most beautiful part of the sky, and then here was about 5 minutes before the sun set below the horizon, so I still had a little bit of light in the foreground. So total control over the image. In Hong Kong, this is basically an adjusted raw file. This is the elusive Hong Kong sunrise. If you want the sun to rise over the river, you have to be there in the summertime. That's their monsoon season. So don't even bother with an umbrella, just bring a snorkel. It's crazy. It's insane. If you were in the thunderstorm last night here in New York, that's like a drizzle in Hong Kong. And it's wild. So most of the mornings I got washed out, but 5 mornings in I was actually able to see the sun. And then what I was able to do is blend it together with about 30 minutes prior of the blue hour. So you can see all of that coming from here to here. And it's a really fun technique. So, and if you think about it, I'm not a control freak about many things, but I like having total control over the light in my scene. So this gets back to this image of New York, which was actually shot for Fujifilm. So I do a lot of client work too. And I don't, I can't tell them, if they want me to shoot Dubai, I can be like, well, give me 5 years, and I'll eventually get some fog shots for you. It just doesn't work that way, no matter who you're working with. So I prefer to control it. So this is that first shot, straight out of camera, with a 30-second exposure. But since the sun went behind the clouds, I lost the element of the gold hour, which means I don't have any light on the foreground. But the previous exposure had light on the pylons. So I combined those together. Then I just had to wait for the lights in Manhattan to come on about 20 minutes after that. So that's exposure blending, and now the contrast adjustment. Once that's done, then we do the final tweaks on the image, color, contrast, and different things like that. And it's fun because it gives you the full level of control. Now, this is really interesting if we watch this, because this is what happens when we shoot in popular locations around the world and we're trying to capture stars. So this is a composite build of about 150 30-second exposures. Now, to do star trails is actually quite simple inside of Photoshop. You bring them, every single image in as a layer, there's an action for that, and you select them all and you use the lighten blending mode. And what that does, it just basically takes everything that's dark away and just leaves the stars. And notice the stars look pretty cool, but what about the foreground? It looks bad. You know what you're seeing? Selfie, 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 iPad. That's it. All sorts of selfie, selfie, iPad going on. So we can't use that. So going back to the way that I shoot, I'm establishing a controlled scene. So this is shot during the blue hour. It's shot at f8, probably a 15-second exposure. It's really sharp and in focus. When we're doing night photography, often we're having to go to ISO 1600, 3200, f2.8. They're not optimum settings if you want to reproduce things large. So here, what I've been able to do is take this image with this image to create this one together. Yeah, it seems complicated, but it's actually not. It's actually as simple as those 4 steps that I showed at the beginning. And getting into post-processing today can be a little bit intimidating, because if you search anything on YouTube these days, well, you know what happens. How do I make amazing images on YouTube? And well, good luck with that. Like, there's a lot going on YouTube. So what I wanted to do, I actually teamed up with Fstoppers over the last 4 years, and I created a course. And I created the Photographing the World course, which is about now has become 60 lessons over, I think, 50 hours of education. And it starts with Photographing the World 1 in Iceland. If you've never taken a photo or used Lightroom before in your life, it teaches everything both in the field and in post-processing. So what's unique throughout these series is each lesson starts with the planning of the location, the shooting of the location, all the in-camera settings. Then we take those same files that are captured in the field in each location and do all of the post-processing. The raw files are included, the Lightroom files are included, and the PSDs are included. So these are all downloadable through my website that takes you to fstoppers.com. So I'll give you the link to my website at the end, and if you're interested in creating actually many of the shots that you've seen there, this is a good place to start. Now, something else that I'm working on too, these are premium tutorials, so you do have to purchase them. So I had this idea, I wanted to create a new series that's absolutely free. And on June 18th of this month, which kind of scares me because we're in post-production right now and we still have a lot, I'll release the first episode of a 13-part series for free on YouTube that not only teaches photography, but introduces you to some incredible photographers all over the world as they teach their specific genre. And this is the trailer. I just wanted to share it with you guys because not many people have seen it yet.
Okay, are you comfortable?
No, I'm not comfortable.
Okay, let's go.
I've always shared my photos with the world. Now, I also want to share everything in between. The travel, the people, the food, the experiences. These are the true stories behind each moment in time. So this will be 13 episodes, 100% free, all on YouTube. So I'm really excited about it. Thanks for that, actually. So I'm really excited about that. I've been working on it for, oh my God, forever now. And now we're getting ready to record all the voiceover and get it all ready. So I'm excited about that. But what I want to leave you guys with is we're very lucky. We live in a very beautiful world. We live in a time where we have amazing technology. We have amazing networks of people all over the world, different photographers, different communities. there's no reason why we can't go anywhere and photograph something and have a great time. But no matter where you go, the most important thing is that you go with all of your heart, because that's the most important. Make sure you're having fun. Thanks.
Just wondering, what type of lens do you use for most of your landscapes and cityscapes?
Typically it's going to be on the wider end. So if you're using, let's say, full frame camera, it's probably going to be like a 14 to 24 or a 16 to 35. And then now I'm shooting medium format, so I'm a little bit more fixed with the GFX series, the 50S and the 100S. My widest is 18 millimeter. So I've gotten used to sort of seeing the world at 18. But I would say if I had a second lens, it would be the equivalent of like a 24-70. And then very rarely is something telephoto, but typically wide angle.
For the 5 years, where did you do, Stu? Airbnb or just like in between?
We started using Airbnb a lot, but we for many years were traveling on an extremely fixed budget. And with Airbnb years ago, it was wonderful, but you had to pay in advance. And that was tough. And especially with their cancellation fees, they've gotten better about that over the years. Now what I've started to use is booking.com. So let's say I think I'm going to be somewhere for the fall colors in October. I'm probably going to be there. I can book something on booking.com. Even apartments now, same listings on Airbnb are on booking.com with really good cancellation rates. Like you can cancel 24, 48 hours in advance. So now I kind of just, if I think something's going to happen, I just go ahead and book it. But in the beginning, it was sort of a combination between when we could afford to pay in advance, Airbnb, and specifically if we're going to stay somewhere longer than a week. Because staying in hotels, even if it's a nice hotel, it's great, but you spend a lot more money on food when you can't cook for yourself. And when you have an apartment, you can cook for yourself, you can do your laundry. It's just a better experience. Usually you're staying in a neighborhood, in a nice part of town, so I still prefer apartments over hotels. Yeah, for 5 years well, let's just say we learned a lot about how to design a really good apartment for people. It was amazing, like some of these places, you're like, no towels, no what, But yeah, we basically just hopped from place to place. And it was tough too, because somebody would say, hey, could you maybe come here in 3 months? We're like, no, we kind of need a commitment because we have to be somewhere. We can't just be nowhere. So our Google Calendar is still multicolored, but it was like 6 layers of, we had like a probability calendar that I called it, was places we might be, and then we had all of the events for hard event dates, places we knew we had to be. And then sometimes we'd end up with these holes in the calendar and we'd have no idea where to go. We're like, where should we go? This is a weird problem to have. Do we want to photograph stuff? Do we need to catch up on office work? So we just started picking places like, Rome. We like going to Rome if we could. We actually used South Korea for a while because we love Korean food and it's actually affordable and their internet's super fast. So you have to get work done. Wow, their internet's really good.
First of all, thank you for being here and outstanding work and presentation. When you're compositing, many ways to mask and isolate subjects. Do you have a favorite go-to that just seems to work?
As far as single technique for masking?
Yes, when you're doing the time blending.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question because, yeah, we can talk about really advanced ways to composite things or blend things, but usually the simplest method is just using a gradient ramp. A mask with a black and white transition from top to bottom. And I also use a Wacom tablet and stylus. So usually what I'm doing is just drawing a gradient, a simple gradient, or I'm just painting. And when I'm painting, I'm actually using pressure sensitivity. So I can kind of just airbrush those areas in. So 9 times out of 10, it's very simple. A few brush strokes, a gradient, and some quick masking, and it's done. So a lot simpler than you'd think.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Elia. David?
Thanks, everyone.